All right, the topic of this video is how a bill, which is a proposed law, becomes like a final law. It's a really complicated process, and the odds are stacked against any proposed bill actually becoming a law. So, only a member of Congress can propose a law. It can't be done by like a member of the public. It has to be done by an actual member of Congress. And when a bill is introduced in the House, it also has to be introduced in the Senate, or like vice versa. So you always have to have good relationships with somebody in the opposite house, because when you introduce a bill, you need somebody in the opposite house to introduce a similar bill. So like it's not like they are separate, but they have to work together as well. So sometimes it might just go all the way through one house first, and then it has to go through the second, or it might go through at the same time, right? So to make it a little bit easier, this is an example of a bill that goes through kind of at the same time. So any rep can propose a law. Let's say, the proposed law is that by 2026, every car made in the United States, sold in the United States, has to have like rear passenger airbags. So if it's introduced in the House first, you need a senator to also introduce it. So again, you have initially the same law, same bill, like proposed law that's introduced in both the House and the Senate. Um, this is when we're now like focusing on stuff that we talked about in previous videos. Instead of the entire House and the entire Senate sort of discussing and debating the bill to make all cars have rear airbags by 2026, the bill is assigned to the most relevant committee. So just remember, these are like the committees we talked about. So the most relevant committee dealing with airbags in cars would be the Transportation Committee, which is number 18 down here for House. And then it's the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee in the Senate. So most likely, we would be assigning those bills just to be looked at by the handful of reps and the handful of senators that are on that transportation related committee. They're sort of like the screeners. Like that's why these committees are so important, is because they see the bills first. They decide what bills move on beyond them and are actually debated and discussed by the entire House and the entire Senate. So there are a couple important things about these committees. Once the bill is sent to a committee, the rep or senator that initially introduced it loses control of it. And those committees can make changes to the bills. That's called like a markup. When you change a bill, you're marking it up. So that's the first important thing to notice about the committee, is that they have the ability to change the proposed like bill. Also, there's some differences between the House and the Senate. Um, a similarity, actually, first, is that most of the bills never make it out of the committee that it's first sent to. They just die in committee. The committee decides that like it's not a good enough idea to move forward. And remember, on each of these committees, you essentially have more of the majority party than the minority party, right? So that's also like significant. When a bill just is like it dies in committee, it like doesn't move past the committee and nobody ever gets to debate it beyond just the committee members. That's called pigeonholing a bill. It's like an old school nickname for it, but it just means the committee decides not to recommend the bill move any further. And most bills that are proposed just die at this stage, right? They're just ideas that never move any further. Um, there is a special sort of mechanism on the House side that the rest of the House can force a bill out of a committee to be considered by everybody, even if the committee doesn't recommend that. And that's called a discharge petition. If a member of the House of Representatives calls for a discharge petition with a majority vote of the entire House, the bill can be forced out of the Transportation Committee in this circumstance, even if the Transportation Committee doesn't want to move it beyond this point. That doesn't exist on the Senate side, right? You can't discharge a bill in committee. So again, when the bill just dies in committee and the committee doesn't recommend it move any further than this, it's called pigeonholing a bill, and it can be discharged out of a House committee. It can't be discharged or forced out of a Senate committee. Uh, so let's say that the House committee of Transportation Committee makes some changes to the bill, and they're like, you know what? We don't want it to be by the end of 2026. We want it to be by the end of 2023. But on the Senate side, the Senate's Transportation Committee, they make different changes, right? Because they're not talking to each other. They're two different committees. And they say, you know what, we want it to be by 2027. So from this point forward, you actually have two different bills being discussed because the House committee made different changes to the original bill than the Senate committee made. So that's an important thing to note. From this point forward, you're now like negotiating or debating two separate bills. All right. Also, on the House side, there's one special step beyond this that it has to go through because debate is so much more structured in the House of Representatives. Before it moves on for consideration, it has to pass through what's called a Rules Committee. The Rules Committee only exists in the House, and they set the ground rules for debate from this point forward. Like, how long are the debates going to be on this particular like proposed bill? The committee can also establish what's called a closed rule, and they can attach it to the bill, meaning that no more changes can be added from this point forward. Or they can attach what's called an open rule to a bill, meaning that you could potentially change it even further beyond this point and make some tweaks to it. So again, there's a special committee that has to discuss it on the House side before it moves on. But we're going to discuss like a rare bill that makes it out of both committees, right? And it's possible that it might make it out of a House committee, but be killed in the Senate committee, or like vice versa. But this particular bill is going to make it out of like both. So the House Transportation Committee recommends they make a change to the bill. Rear airbags have to be mandated by 2023. The Senate committee says 2027, and they move it out. And it's now, for the first time, going to be sent to the entire House for debate and vote, and the entire Senate for debate and vote. So again, the entire House now is debating and voting on adding rear airbags to cars by 2023. And on the Senate side, they're now all discussing and debating and voting on rear airbags by 2027. And now this is where on the House side, or Senate side, excuse me, that one senator could like filibuster this whole thing potentially, right? We talked previously about what a filibuster is. Could be where that's done. But again, this is the rare bill that keeps going. And let's say that a majority of the House supports adding rear airbags to cars by 2023, and a majority of the Senate is okay with it by adding them by 2027. So let's say it's approved by each House. Well, now they've effectively approved two different versions of what was initially the same bill. So each bill has to be sent to what's called a conference committee. A conference committee is unique because it's made up of both reps and senators that work together, and they iron out differences that may exist between the two bills. Like the House bill is mandating this happen by 2023, the Senate bill is calling for this to happen by 2027. Let's say the reps and the senators come together and they agree on 2025 as the compromise. It then gets kicked back to the entire House for debate and vote on now rear airbags by 2025. And on the Senate side, they have to now debate and discuss and vote the new date, 2025. And then it could filibuster here, like again. Let's say again, this is the rare bill, and a majority of the House approves, and a majority of the Senate approves, right? The president then has like the option of then signing the bill into law, and rear airbags will be mandated by 2025, or the president can veto it here. If the president vetoes it, Congress could still pass the law by now going through this process again, but like revoting instead of just a majority, like a 2/3 vote is required to override a presidential veto. So again, this is an oversimplification of the process, but I just want you to see how difficult it is for a proposed bill to become a law. And every step, the obstacles are like monumentally stacked in front of potential bills becoming laws. It's a very, very difficult process under good terms, especially when you have things divided so much politically as we do today.